So I'm going to go ahead. I'll start the recording here, and we'll start with the presentation. So thank you, those of you who joined us, and hopefully thank you to all sorts of additional people who might be seeing this once it gets posted by the Wisconsin Council for Social Studies. So I am David Olson. I am a high school social studies teacher in Madison, Wisconsin. I also have the wonderful pleasure of doing some work with the folks from the National Constitution Center. So I have with me today, I don't even know your exact titles, but Curry Sautner and Mike Adams, if you want to introduce yourselves.
I'll start. So I'm Curry Sautner. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the National Constitution Center. It's great. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for doing this, David. And this is great to start sharing what materials we've had online and what we're literally rolling out this minute as we speak. So brand new for everybody.
And I'm Mike Adams, Director of Education at the National Constitution Center. And ditto to what Curry said, we have a lot of stuff that we've been doing for years and we know works. And then we have a lot of stuff that we think might work. So we're glad you're here to join us and figure some of that out.
Wonderful. So my goal here is I was going to be presenting about this at the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies. And so this will be a sort of replication of that, but also much better because I have the two experts, the people who not only have helped create these things, but supported teachers in using them here with us. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about why I use materials from the National Constitution Center, some of the things that are out there. Mike and Curry will chime in, and they also have some really important information about new stuff that is happening and being rolled out as we speak. So give me just a second to load this so I can share my screen with you. Wonderful. Now we'll go to present. So just a little bit, the presentation that I'm going through, you can get with the, there's a bit.ly down at the bottom. It's also, if you got to us from the Wisconsin Council from the Social Studies sort of page where we've been putting all of our presentations, this slide deck is linked there as well. But if you want that bit.ly, you can go ahead and scratch it out now. So the National Constitution Center, this is where Mike gets to see how much of his presentations I've stolen over my lifetime. So it was created by Congress in 1988 with the task of educating the citizens of this country and others about the Constitution, what it is, why it's important, all of those sorts of things. And in wonderful congressional fashion, it was created with zero funding, which I teach my AP government students, that's what we call an unfunded mandate. And so it opened in 2003. So it exists as a physical place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I have had the luxury of going there, although not with students, and I'm guessing people who are joining us from Wisconsin, Iowa, elsewhere, might not ever have the luxury of bringing students there to learn, but the wonderful thing is they have all sorts of information and resources that are online. So their goal is to teach people about the Constitution in a nonpartisan manner. I grabbed some quotes for those of you who saw Chief Justice John Roberts at the end of the calendar year put out a report about sort of the state of civic education and talked about how it was suffering, about how civic education has been marginalized and how we need to improve, although he did very clearly call out the National Constitution Center as an organization that's doing fantastic things in trying to help people learn about the Constitution and help students learn about the Constitution. So he references a couple things here, a couple of which I will talk about. So why do we need constitutional education? If you're not following this account on Twitter, it's one of my favorites. It's an account called Bad Legal Takes, where all sorts of people feel the need to chime in, sometimes about the Constitution and constitutional law. So here's one wonderful tweet from CNN. Says, this man lit a marijuana cigarette in front of a judge during his court appearance for a simple marijuana possession, and Rand Brick replied, double jeopardy. that is not double jeopardy. Or, man, there were so many great posts during impeachment. It says, if the president is impeached, his whole cabinet gets removed with him, and the Speaker of the House is president. Thank you for your time. Again, if you're familiar with the Constitution, not how it works. So why do we need to teach our students about the Constitution? So that they don't end up on bad legal takes on Twitter, if for no other reason. So the Constitution Center focuses sort of on these three pillars here of trying to teach students. So looking at the wonderful stories that are there to teach students about here's what the Constitution means and why it's important, some constitutional thinking skills, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as civil dialogue and reflection. So how do we have these conversations and work through these ideas and problems in a civil manner and in a way that gets students to think. So we talk a little bit, and I know I'm going through some of this fast because I want to get like, here are the tools you can put to use. But one of the big things that the National Constitution Center looks at is the difference between political questions and constitutional questions. So, and here, very adaptable for us in this moment is, should the federal government increase income taxes, or should the federal government make direct payments to citizens of however many thousands of dollars? That one would be a political question of, should the government do some of these things? What are the arguments for and against actions that are political in nature versus a constitutional question of, according to the Constitution, what may the government do? So here, when we talk about, President Trump ordering today of using particular powers to try to get manufacturing organizations to create things like more ventilators. Should the government do that is a great question. And then we might ask a constitutional question of what power or where does the power come from to enable President Trump to do something like that. So I'm going to skip over that part here. So among the tools that can be used by teachers, by students, by others, one is the interactive Constitution. So this is a really great website as well as app for both iOS and Android, where students can get not only the Constitution right on their phone, but also wonderful constitutional interpretation. So there is literally analysis of every single clause within the Constitution. My favorite part here is the NCC has brought together these amazing legal scholars on all sorts of constitutional issues, brought them together, said, come together and write what you believe both of you can agree on for the common interpretation for this clause, this amendment, this issue in the Constitution. And then go write a separate short article about here are the places where we disagree or where we think this issue is moving or what we have concerns about. So it's a great way to model for your students, here is the things we're debating about these different constitutional issues. So the bit.ly at the bottom there will take you directly to the interactive Constitution. You can also find it with an easy Google search or search within the App Store or Google Play Store. So here's an example here, a screenshot of the matters of debate. So this is looking at freedom of speech and the press. Again, Jeffrey Stone and Eugene Volokh, like giants in the field of First Amendment free speech issues. They're the ones who came together to write the common interpretation essay, and then they have their own commentary here. Anything I'm missing so far, Curry, Mike? Okay.
No, I'm actually quite jealous. Your presentation's far better than mine. So
there
keep
you
going.
go. Well, feel free to.
Yeah, you're doing great. It's awesome. I just would hate if you guys were watching us.
Okay. So one way that I've put this to use in my classroom with high schoolers is there are also some wonderful lesson plans that have been written connecting to these things. So for example, there is an entire First Amendment plan of study that includes not only the readings from the interactive Constitution, but includes some really good lesson plans, some videos, all of those sorts of things. So if you are transitioning or thinking about transitioning to a flipped learning model or a distance learning model for the next few weeks or months, some of these resources are really good ones to use. And for example, I've used the main First Amendment lesson plan, easily adaptable to be done via distance. So some good shorter readings for students, some good videos. There's definitely some ways you could take these resources and put them in a slightly different manner than they currently are. I'm going to skip over the exchanges because we're going to talk much more about that, particularly with Mike and Curry. Here is an example of a lesson plan that I've put together. I used this early on in my semester of AP US Government and Politics. When we talk about, after we talk about the Constitution, then we talk about how to interpret the Constitution. And so I have my students use one of the articles about democratic constitutionalism, or essentially like how do we look at the Constitution and make decisions about it. So you can find that lesson plan of mine that includes not only the interactive Constitution, but a number of other resources at that link. All right, these ones are actually my favorite. So these two, Writing Rights and Rights Around the World, these were actually developed, I think, first as museum exhibits at the actual NCC, which have now been put online so that teachers and students can make use of them. So Writing Rights, basically, here, I'll put up the information on here, and I'll tell you what it is. So basically, Writing Rights, which is my favorite, takes everything that ended up in the Bill of Rights and looks at all of the things that influenced it and came before it. So you have not only Madison's original language that he is proposing in that first Congress, but you have the historical sources. So things like the different state constitutions or state charters that are written. You have, here, I'll see if I can load it and have this work for people to see in real time. But here, if we look at something like the First Amendment, we have Madison's original language here. We have the things that came before. So here's the Delaware Declaration of Rights. So that the liberty of the press ought to be inviolably preserved. You can see how that matches up with the language that we ultimately got in the US Constitution. You can also see all of the amendments and changes or proposed changes that people made in either the House or the Senate, and then see what we end up with. My favorite, and again, I've stolen this from Mike's presentation, is to look at the Second Amendment. Essentially, the controversy about the Second Amendment in terms of its place in the Constitution and what it means, that basic, butting of heads is the Second Amendment a personal, individual right to have a weapon and to use it for self-defense, or is this wrapped up in something about like states having militias and this really being for the armed forces? And the answer, of course, to that is yes, it's both of them, and it depends on where you look. I actually just created a big lesson for my students to sort of hack away at for the next couple weeks. And one of the little modules I looked at was, or included, was looking here at writing rights, and to have them go through and not only tell me about the Second Amendment, where can they find the evidence for both it being a personal individual right, as well as something that might be more to like a militia or an army. And then to look at some others. So again, these are ways we can take these really, really good tools and then have students use them when they're not in front of us. Mike, what are some of I know you always have some go-tos here on the Second Amendment.
So the go-tos that I typically use are the North Carolina Declaration of Rights from 1776.
Okay.
Because that one reads, the right of the people to keep and bear arms for defense of the state and the standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty. They ought not to be kept up, and the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. What does
he didn't even look at my screen for that. He just rattled that.
It's all, I say it in my sleep. It's really embarrassing. But what I like with that one is if you pose that question, if you pose this text to students with the question, where do you see an individual right, the possession of arms for self-defense? They'll look at it they'll stare at it, they'll try to find it, and then they'll realize it isn't there. But it has to be somewhere because we wouldn't have just invented this understanding. So David, if you don't mind closing out of that one and opening the Pennsylvania Minority of 1787.
And here it is.
So the Pennsylvania Minority, these are the guys who here in Pennsylvania we affectionately call the losers. They're the ones who voted against ratification of the Constitution. And one of their reasons for voting against ratification is that they thought the Constitution should have a clause in it that read something like this, that the right of the people to bear arms for the defense of themselves and their own state or the United States or for the purposes of killing game, and no law shall be passed for disarming the people or any of them unless for crimes committed or real danger of public injury from individuals. It has that thing about standing armies in time of peace again. And then at the very end of the clause, it says that any person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms ought to be exempted upon payment of an equivalent to employ another to bear arms in his stead, which is a long-winded Pennsylvania way of saying, if for religious reasons you can't serve in the military, you don't have to, but you do have to have somebody serve on your behalf. But if you go back up to the top of that clause, the top of the Pennsylvania Minority line, it says that the people have a right to bear arms for self-defense. They can protect their state, they can protect the United States, and they can go hunting. And they can't be disarmed unless they've committed crimes or they're a danger to the public, which in a weird way sounds like a strikingly modern kind of place of looking around debates around the Second Amendment, because kind of all of modern debates fit into that first sentence. And then the third text that I normally show is way down the bottom. It's the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1790. Where all we wrote was the right of citizens to bear arms in defense of the state shall not be questioned. Period, full stop, end of sentence. It doesn't say that it's for hunting. It doesn't say that you can be disarmed for any reason. And so I show these three texts to students, to teachers, and I like to pose the question of, so when students come to you and they say, what did the right to bear arms mean in the founding era? Even that has to be unpacked. Do you mean 1776 when we're declaring independence from England? Do you mean 1787 when we're ratifying the Constitution? Do you mean 1790 when the Bill of Rights is being proposed? So even within what does the Second Amendment mean in the founding era, there's a lot to unpack because there are individual rights and collective rights and fear of a standing army and all that's baked into just those three texts. So you don't even have to use all of the historical sources to tell a complicated story, but your students can really grapple with the complexities of what some of these rights meant in the founding era.
Wonderful. So this is one of my favorite, actually this is my favorite tool that the NCC has created and put online. And so I'll link in sort of the document and activity that I created for my students. Like I said, this is one module that I have my students do, or they are currently doing. And what I have them do is go through and find those pieces of evidence for the Second Amendment, and then go through a couple other, tell me like where are we seeing tension in sort of what comes before. I also tell them go find an amendment that you like, that you currently like the language of, and then go through and find language that you like better and tell me why. Tell me what you think would have changed or would be changed about what that right means for us if it was written in a different manner. The next tool is called Rights Around the World. So again, this is one very cool. What happens here along the outside, you have all of these different rights, some that are in the Constitution itself, although as I tell Mike every time, they are missing Bill of Attainder. I will never let him forget this. And then all of the rights that are within the Bill of Rights themselves. So what happens here, if you click on something like freedom of religion, what it's going to show you is the text in the US Constitution, but then it's also going to show you all of the places around the country that have some sort of guarantee of freedom of religion in their own constitution. So you can see freedom of religion, a pretty popular one. The right to bear arms, a much less popular one. The right to protect yourself against self-incrimination, that one's sort of in the middle. And then what you can do is go ahead and click on one of the other countries and you'll see a side-by-side comparison of the text. both in the US Constitution as well as elsewhere. Not sure if everyone can see this here. I got to move my little Zoom guy over to the side. This is what it says here in Argentina. I just picked them randomly. I don't actually know what it says for this, but no inhabitant of the nation may be punished without prior trial based on law, yada, yada, yada. So those, I like this. It gives students the opportunity to see what those, number one, what sort of rights do people have in other places around the globe? And number two, what do those rights look like? Are they similar to ours? Are they different? Are they more expansive? Are they more narrow? And then another great thing to do here would be something like looking at freedom of speech, of expression, and then searching some of those places around the globe that that you go, really? They have that there? My favorite here, again, I've stolen this from Mike, is to look at the country of North Korea, which also somehow guarantees the right of free expression. So what we have here, it's the North Korean Constitution literally says citizens are guaranteed freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, demonstration, and association. The state shall guarantee conditions for the free activity of democratic political parties and social organizations. It should not come as a shock to you. This is not true, which also brings up a really good opportunity for hopefully an in-class discussion, but in today's world, some sort of reflection for what actually needs to happen in order for people to legitimately hold these rights. It's obviously one thing to put it down on paper, and something almost entirely different to actually have it in practicality. So having your students look at what is necessary to have these rights and to guarantee them. Any other favorites here, Mike or Curry, that you'd like me to point out?
Just one thing to kind of add to what you're saying there is, especially with current events, sometimes I use this in the flip way where we look at current events, and then if something is going on in a country about free speech or religion, then you backwards into what does the law say in that country? And then what does the law say into our country? So it's a fun way to flip it and use it in that angle. And then I don't know if you might have said this and I just missed it, the percentage at the bottom.
Oh, where it matches the text. Yeah. I don't think I did. So here, if
we
can see,
go ahead.
Yeah. So freedom of assembly between the United States and Mexico, it will show you here a 5% match. And so you can go through and see how it's written, how closely that right ends up mirroring the rights we have in this country. Curry, what you brought up there with things happening in current events, I know it's actually we just passed the year anniversary of this, but I know in schools around the country for the past many years, issues of gun rights and the right to bear arms has been something that comes up often, right? And when we had the massacre that occurred almost exactly a year ago in New Zealand, this was one of the things that came up when New Zealand announced almost immediately after immense new restrictions on the right to own firearms. Well, if you come here, you can see it simply just, if I can find New Zealand, that's Japan right here. Feel like I'm being put on the spot by the Secretary of State. So what we have here, you can see New Zealand is not highlighted, right? There is no fundamental constitutional right to bear arms in New Zealand, which is something that allows that country to come up with, here are going to be new measures, new restrictions. All right, Mike, anything else you want me to add about rights around the world?
I would just say, since you're already on the right to bear arms, that even if you were to select any of the other countries that are highlighted, every single one has built in an explicit clause giving the central government authority the ability to restrict the possession of firearms. So in Iran, the Islamic Republic will create a system of military training with requisite facilities, but that the possession of arms has to have permission granted by competent authorities. In the United Kingdom, the clause might be a little outdated. It's from the English Bill of Rights of 1689, and it says that the subjects which are Protestants may have arms suitable to their condition and is allowed by law. But even in 1689,
that sounds about right, I think.
Right. This, of course, is a late 17th century attempt by Parliament to make sure that Catholics can't take over the monarchy or Parliament. But even 100 years before we're crafting our Bill of Rights, In the United Kingdom, there's a clause in there that says suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law. And our Second Amendment doesn't have anything that explicitly says something like that. There's a reference to well-regulated militias and the security of a state, but there's not a clause that reads something like suitable to their condition and is allowed by law. In Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti all have similar clauses in their constitutions that say permission has to be granted, or in Mexico, certain guns can be reserved for use by the Army, Navy, Air Force, and National Guard. All of this is a very complicated, long-winded, pedantic way of saying, if students come to you and they say, well, like David just said, if something happens in New Zealand and here's the response, why don't things respond here? It's not to say that guns are good or bad, or the possession of firearms is good or bad, or the Second Amendment means this or means that. It's just to say that if you look at the United States globally on this constitutional question, we stand out very separately from everybody else. It's a very different conversation here. So it's one of those rare places where you can't do what David said earlier and go around the world and see, well, how does everyone else put this in their constitution? Because they just don't. So it's always going to be a different conversation here than it is anywhere else.
Wonderful.
That's what I got.
Excellent.
And not to keep going on that, but for 1 second,
Yeah.
that's the next online learning module that we're developing at the center. We're in the beginning of it right now. Is how do you bring this conversation into a very modern context and keep it around what does the Constitution say, and then what are actions in either way that you believe in guns that you're allowed to take through the constitutional framework. So what can the government do, what can it not do, and how can we amend, change, add, or keep the Constitution the way it is? So that's in the next 2 weeks, we'll be launching that one.
Nice.
Yeah, keep it going.
All right. So I talked about writing rights, talked about rights around the world. So this is going to be sort of where I can back out and where Curry and Mike can talk a little bit more about the exchanges. So here's some information. Again, this has my contact. I will go back and show you quick the bit.ly to see this whole presentation if you'd like, and then I will unshare my screen and give Mike and Curry an opportunity to talk a little bit about exchanges, and then I'll switch roles. I'll do what they did, and then chime in as appropriate for things. So here, hopefully this works. Okay, wonderful, good. Hey, look, there's so many more people here than when I started this. Welcome, everyone. Again, for those of you just joining us, my name is David Olson. I am a high school social studies teacher in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm very proud to be able to do some work, part of the teacher advisory board for the National Constitution Center. With me today are Curry Sutner and Mike Adams, who are like the two people. I'll go like this, Mike, you answer to Curry. The two people who not only help create a bunch of these fantastic digital tools, but also the people who help spread them to other teachers. So the Classroom Exchange program is one where in its initial inception, and something that I got to be part of a handful of times in the past year or so, is where you'd have your class be able to have a constitutional conversation with another class somewhere else around the country that's moderated by someone from the National Constitution Center, basically about a constitutional issue. So I've had the pleasure of having students do it a handful of different times, looking at First Amendment issues, but I'll turn it over now. I will stop talking. Mike, Curry, you take it away. Curry, you have to unmute yourself first, though.
I thought I did it already. It yells at me. I like it. It tells me unmute. Yeah. Mike, do you want to go over the exchange as what it was a month ago? And then I can add in how we're pivoting to make this continue and to give you all tools to access our team, our scholars, and our experiences wherever you may be. So does that sound good?
Sure. So the exchanges, to kind of recap a little bit from the beginning of this session, are kind of a culminating part of our education framework, which is 3 parts. It's historical foundations through storytelling, constitutional thinking skills, and civil dialogue and reflection. And the idea for us is it's great if we know all this content. It's really empowering to know all this historical information. But if we can't have healthy civil discussion about major constitutional questions, then this whole idea of a democratic republic is, not that serious. So in order for citizenship to work, in order for our framework for government to function, we need to be able to come together, express our views openly, separate our political thoughts from our constitutional thoughts when we need to do that, and then to be able to, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg would say, disagree without being disagreeable. And that's really the goal for us, is to be able to have those kinds of conversations. So one of the many ways we've launched that was with classroom exchanges, which in the last year and a half since they initially launched have seen nearly 4,000 students participate, was to have 2 classrooms in different parts of the country at the same time, just like we're doing now. 2 classrooms would log into Zoom, and those 2 classes would engage in a 30-minute conversation with a constitutional expert or legal professional moderating, who's really just there to pose questions, clarify things as needed, and then step back and let the students really drive the discussion. And we launched those with freedom of speech and other constitutional topics over the last year and a half. And they've been extremely successful, extremely rewarding for us. We've had something like, I think it's 30 different states represented through participation. And we were growing and growing and growing. And then COVID-19 hit. Which is going to be my cue to hand things over to Curry to talk about how we're adapting the things we've learned from the existing exchange structure to meet the needs of students and teachers when students are now kind of, as we all know, scattered in their homes and not all contained in classroom spaces.
So, and I hope nobody associates me with COVID-19 in that connecting point, not to just at all.
And me saying I'll pass it along to you probably isn't great either. So yeah.
I appreciate so much just all of us being here on an online community, because this is where we're all learning together and experimenting and exploring. So I'm going to show you a bunch of things that we're putting out there. And we'd love for you to be just like David and jump in with us as learners and as experimenting as we go. We want to set these things up to just be as accessible as possible to as many kids as possible and as many teachers as possible, but we will also need feedback. So if you notice something, see something, or have a good idea, then you just education@constitutioncenter.org, email David and get it to us, because we really are a team that likes to be very respectful of the ideas that are out there, but we, even more than that, we want to hear what you're thinking and what you need so we can make it better. So as I say this, I'm going to do a screen share, and some people are horrified about how many things I have on my desktop, and you'll only see it for a second, but you might want to close your eyes if you have any issues with mess.
Is this going to be one of those things where we see you have like 47,000 unread emails? Because that is going to be what makes me go nuts.
Don't look. I was like, don't look. You can't see how many I've read and haven't answered. But this is what I want to show you. Okay, so you guys can all see my screen, right? No problems there. So we literally just launched this in the last 15 minutes. And so again, we're learning as we go. So the exchanges, that idea that kids can talk to each other about these big constitutional issues and ask, can they do that? May the government do that? Where's their limitations, and where do we play a part in this discussion, this role, and this idea of popular sovereignty? How do we govern ourselves? We don't want to lose that. We want to keep that going, and we want to give kids this opportunity no matter where they are. So what we launched is a new program that is trying to bring all of our assets up in front, and 2 students and 2 teachers and 2 parents. So we just added this online civic learning opportunities. This was just to give you some comfort. These were plans that we've had in the place for the last year. We just moved the timeline up a lot faster. So we have been thinking through this. The exchanges, we piloted last year and saw around 3,400 students, or was it 2,400? It was about 3,000 students talking to each other. This year alone, we were already at 3,500 students this school year alone, and we were going towards 10,000. And we noticed in that time that there was other needs of schools and students. And so these were already in the hopper, and how could we use our resources to best share? So we are starting this tomorrow. So if you want to jump in if you want to send it to your kids, send it to your kids. If you want to jump in as an adult and learn for yourself, learn for yourself. If you want to just watch as a teacher, jump in. Tomorrow we are launching our first, what we're referring to as scholarly exchanges. So where we get a scholar and a group of middle schoolers or high school and college students all in a dialogue around these big constitutional questions. These scholarly exchanges will probably be a little more Socratic method, where there's a little mini lectures mixed in with questions and discussions from the audience. Tomorrow we're doing a 12 o'clock and a 1 o'clock. The 12 o'clock programs every Thursday and Friday will be devoted to the middle school audience. The 1 o'clock program every Thursday and Friday, every Wednesday and Thursday will be, this week we started it on Thursday, and futures will have different days. 12 o'clock is always high school, 1 o'clock is always 12 o'clock is always middle school, 1 o'clock is always high school and college.
And please note those times are Eastern. I think I don't know where all of the people who are joining us today are from, but those of you who are Wisconsinites or Iowans or elsewhere, you gotta do the adjustment. I will not ask Curry to do that. If you want to hear the story on that, you can ask me another time.
Future us will discuss how I cannot do that. So these are all Eastern EDTs. We have launched 8 weeks. So the idea here is that we're going to give you a few options, and again, what you feel comfortable with. This is, again, for student focused. We will do these scholar exchanges, scholars to students, every single Wednesday and Thursday, which are open source. So any middle school student at 12 o'clock in the week 2, which is March 25th and 26th, will be able to join in a conversation around the First Amendment led by one of our top scholars. Combined, it's co-moderated with one of our education people from the center. So we're not just turning the scholars loose on the kids, we're keeping the education team with them so we can co-moderate it. We have questions, we have polls, we have able to let the kids ask questions themselves. We are probably keeping every student video off for these open source discussions to keep everybody safe, but also offering other options. So Wednesdays and Thursdays will be the open source discussions. You can see the list of content that we're gonna go over. We thought, and we can't name it, so it's still the name, we thought we'd do something a little different on Fridays and do something a little bit more open to middle school and high school, that at every Friday at 1 o'clock, you can join in an open dialogue around these big ideas. And we're trying to bring in our top scholars here. So on this Friday is going to be Jeff Rosen. Again, next week will be Jeff Rosen talking about the Fourth Amendment. He's our CEO and our president. He's also the top constitutional scholar on the Fourth Amendment. But this is where kids can really get the foundational stories, pose the constitutional questions. So they're going to be modeled these behaviors that we've talked through for all our content. So if you're a little worried about, oh, my kids aren't going to be ready for this, or they don't have the background on this, I don't want you to worry about it. We're going to give them the tools and the ability to get them there and keep it at a rate that isn't too overwhelming or too much at a high level where the students feel lost. We're also going to give them ability to ask the questions that they want to ask. So if they stop in the middle of it and ask a question of Jeff, like, hey, why did you ever want to be a scholar on the Fourth Amendment? That is completely acceptable, and it's great, and we want to hear those questions too. We are also working with the federal courts to join in these conversations. So federal courts, they're also, the judges are nonpartisan judges, and they'll be able to jump in. We have some guest speakers to be announced, but I'll tell you guys, we're working on people like Ken Burns. We're working on some of the Supreme Court justices, and we're working on people like Henry Louis Gates Jr., Eric Foner, and Eugene Volokh is also in the mix. So when we talk about speech and First Amendment, we're gonna get the scholars that we work with on these to talk and to join in. And again, our goal is to make sure we're making it inclusive for all kids, as well as accessible for different ages. So we are gonna send this out through Zoom webinar, but if kids need to call in and only call in, we're gonna have that as well. So really trying to learn as we go, but offer lots of opportunities. For our AP teachers, we're gonna break down do this really quickly and fun, but all the AP court cases that you have to cover. We're gonna break it up into 2 sessions. But for our non-AP teachers, we wanna make sure that we're gonna have a list of the top 10 court cases. That'll probably come in week 9 and 10. We're not sure, how long we're gonna run it, but if we need it, we're gonna keep going with this. And then there's also the idea that if you want your kids to talk to each other across the country, we're not gonna stop the class-to-class exchanges. just where your students are may be different. But if your students are ready to have a civil dialogue and say they go to the lecture next week on speech, the following week, maybe they want to have a civil dialogue with David's class. We're going to set that up privately so the kids can have private rooms that they get, and there's not 10,000 kids, there's only 20 kids or 30 kids talking to each other, or 40. We're also going to offer private scholar exchanges. So maybe your middle schoolers aren't ready for this in like the big open source way, or maybe your high schoolers aren't ready for this. There's a survey on our little web pages. You fill it out, you let us know what you want to cover. Again, it's going to be the content that we have online around the first, the fourth, these major topics on the Constitution, but just fill out the survey and let us know, and we'll customize it for the needs of your students in your class. And we're really here to be flexible and make sure what we're doing is here to help you keep teaching and your kids keep learning, as long as you just give us feedback along the way as we go. So that's a lot in a snapshot. Here's a real quick snapshot of what the program would look like during that hour-long open source session. Questions, thoughts? David, Mike, chime in.
I would just mention quickly that all this information, just to reiterate, is available on our website, which is constitutioncenter.org. And if you go to constitutioncenter.org, you'll see a banner on the very top of our homepage that has information about kind of all of our responses to COVID-19, which includes these kind of modified classroom exchanges. And you can find, that's the easiest way to find the links rather than trying to kind of jump all over the website. So if you just go right to our homepage and then click the banner at the very top, that'll take you right to all the information you'll need about how to sign up to the exchanges. And then everything else, everything that David talked about towards the beginning, all the stuff that I kind of quickly rambled about, all of our other lesson plans and videos and podcasts and blogs, all of it's completely free. There are no logins or passwords required to do any of it. All of the exchanges that Curry just talked about, all of this stuff is completely free. Neither you nor your students will ever need to log in to access it, other than, of course, logging into Zoom. But to get to everything on our website, it's all there to use. If you have questions about any of it, you can always email us at, again, education@constitutioncenter.org. There are a whole bunch of us who check that account like crazy people, so we'll get back to you within 24 hours with any questions, comments, or concerns. But if you have stuff that you want us to do that you don't see us doing, let us know that too. If you say, hey, this would be great, not promising that we can do it, but it's great for us to know that there are things out there that would be beneficial. So as we're planning how we can support you and your kids, let us know, and then we can always try to factor that in.
So one question, looks like Curry, you just responded to it here in the chat, but interactive activity with Signers Hall.
Yes.
looks like we're on it. All right.
We were already there. It was the first thing we wanted to do, and then they kicked us out of the building. So, but we were discussing that how brilliant zoos have been, because there's still people taking care of the animals. But so we still have people walking through our building. So it may just be our head of operations that is doing the Zoom tour, but he is very, very smart. So we will get it on there. We're working on those. But suggestions like that as we go is great to hear, and great to know how we can think of our spaces differently. And sometimes you guys know that better than we do.
What I would like to see is a group of the penguins going through Signers Hall. That would be ideal for me.
We did once have a chicken, but we may not want to redo that.
You know, since you're so close to Franklin's home, it really should have been a turkey, right?
Yeah,
gone through there.
That would have made a better splash.
Looks like Stacy also asked, what about Freedom Rising as a video? So Stacy apparently is a National Constitution Center power user. That's what I'm getting here.
We're gonna do, so we do have videos that we just finished of some of our other theater productions. So we're gonna figure out how do we get those up, because David was saying earlier, and Mike reiterated, we have a lot of videos and online tools that are on our website already. And so we're just trying to figure out the right ways to elevate them for you all, so it's not so hard to dig through and sift through everything. So Freedom Rising's a little bit trickier. There is a trailer online, which is under our Freedom Rising kind of section in exhibits, which we can send you. But it's because of copyright issues and a lot of legality around the actors, we can't show the whole piece. but we could show snippets of it. And the theater piece around 14 is amazing. And we're gonna get that out to you next week. So sign up for our e-blast. That's the best way. Educator e-blast, sign up for it and you will get everything from us.
In fact, about 20 minutes ago, I got the email that had the new information about the exchanges. So it's like, oh, I'm going to learn about this in just a couple minutes if I'm patient.
Yep. That's what I literally mean right now.
There you go. Are there any other questions from the folks here that we can answer for you before I let you go? Mike and Curry, I want you to stick around for just a moment. I have some other questions for you privately, but one other question from Stacy: is there any type of discussion guide to go with Signers Hall to go with the virtual tour?
Yeah, so our exhibits team right now is working on, they've been doing virtual tours, so they're trying to figure out how really quickly they can turn them on. There is a virtual tour of our core exhibit. Mike, can you let her know, because I can never remember it. What is the virtual tour of the core under?
That part I'm not sure, so I'll have to do some digging, but shoot me an email to that education account, education@Constitution Center, and I will get that answer and get it right back to you.
All right, any other questions from the other folks joining us that we can answer for you? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And like I said, if you missed any part of this, this will be the video once it's downloaded, which might take a little while, is going to be posted on the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies, our virtual conference page, be accessible for anybody else. So if there are other people that you know that you want to go point them to this presentation, feel free to do so. Awesome. Looks like we're getting some thank yous here. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to stop our recording. Mike and Curry, if you'll hang out, and others, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck, everybody.